Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Scrimshaw Show. My name is Evan Scrimshaw. Thanks for joining me on this week's podcast. Follow me on Twitter at eScrimshaw. Follow the show on Twitter at Scrimshaw_show. Read my writing at The Lines. This week, my political betting column is about a pair of Texas runoffs, the Democratic nomination in Texas 28 and the GOP Attorney General nomination. Read my general writing at scrimshawunscripted.substack.com. I have an Australia preview out. I wrote about Neil Young, the Tragically Hip, and Ontario. And yes, that column is somehow coherent, despite the fact that it leads off with, 3 paragraphs about the Tragically Hip and Gord Downey. And read what I will write after I'm done recording this podcast, which I haven't decided what I'm going to write about, but I will write a column because I have time. Buy my book, Salvation in the Storm. And actually, Salvation is where we're going to start this conversation this week on the podcast. Without spoiling too much, one of the characters in that book, Hugh, is from Manchester. And one of the things I use throughout the book is I use that Manchester heritage as a motif. I use it as an opportunity to tell an interesting story about one of the main characters of the book. Because the thing about me is I love music. I adore music. And the thing about so much of understanding places is understanding the music and the musicians that a place fosters, right? Think about the Hip. You think of Kingston. There was never going to be any other place where the Tragically Hip played their last show with Gord. It was always going to be in downtown Kingston. It was always going to be there. And the thing for me, the thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of this, right? Go to Manchester, you think of the Smiths, you think of Johnny Marr, and you think of Morrissey. And almost, you just get there. You just start to hear this charming man play as you talk about it. Think of Hamilton, you think of the Arkells. Think of Newfoundland, you think of Rosetta. Right? It's not a surprise that the Arkells played the halftime show for the Hamilton Grey Cup. And not only is it not a surprise, quite literally every human being with a brain knew that they were going to show up because it's the Arkells and it's Hamilton. Their first album is named Jackson Square for a reason, because it is to fundamentally understand them, you have to understand the city they came from. And in the same way, if you want to understand the city, if you want to understand places, you have to understand the musicians that come from there. What we have is an Ontario election in under 2 months. I'm not worried. People are going to ask if I'm worried. I'm not worried. I still stand by the idea that Stephen Del Duca, at the end of the day, will become the premier after this election. I still believe that. But the thing about it is, I don't want to have that conversation again entirely because I've had it too many times. And I'm sure I'll have to have it many, many more. But for me, that's not an interesting conversation. What is an interesting conversation is trying to figure out why so many people are so divorced from reality and so divorced from the people they think they understand. The column I wrote last week was about how Doug Ford, the people who like Doug Ford for a myriad of reasons. But the thing that people who don't like Doug Ford and who think Doug Ford is, horrible and useless and, whatever else, they don't actually understand why people like Doug Ford. That's not the game that people are playing. And the thing that they will never understand is they can't look at Ford Nation with clear eyes, right? They can't look at this objectively. And Keto Maggie, CEO of Main Street, quote tweeted my column yesterday and said that I was the one betraying a fundamental misunderstanding of Ford's appeal. No, I'm not. Ford got 76 seats at the last election. Christine Elliott would have gotten 90. Doug Ford massively underperformed what a generic conservative would have done in that election. There is no evidence that him or his brother were competent, good politicians, right? There's a lot of subjective nonsense about that. But the notion of the Fords as like good politicians entirely relies on the fact that they won 2 elections, Rob's run for mayor and Doug's 2018 victory, that any conservative would have won. David Miller left Toronto in such a state that there was no universe in which a left winger was ever going to win that mayoral race in 2010. Like, David Miller left that city in such a disastrous place, and the voters were so mad. And the thing you have to remember about Toronto is what qualifies as Toronto. It's a majority new city, right? It's not. It's really the new city picks the mayor, not the old city, right? The reason why it will be so hard for a Mike Layton or any of the downtown councilors, Josh Matlow, whoever else, the reason it will be so hard for them to ever win a mayor's race, and the reason why I suspect John Tory is going to get token opposition now, is that it's really, really hard to win when Etobicoke and Scarborough make up a greater share of the electorate than the old city, right? Depending on how you define downtown, there are basically 8, because Toronto City Council and the federal and the provincial boundaries all share the same thing, right? There are 8 NDP seats in the core of downtown. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Davenport, Danforth, Parkdale, Beaches East York, Toronto Centre, Toronto St. Paul's, University Rosedale, and something else I'm forgetting. Doesn't really matter. Davenport, Danforth. God almighty, I'm going to be mad at myself if I don't get this right. Davenport, Danforth, Beaches, Parkdale, Uni Rose, Toronto Centre, Spadina Fort York, Toronto St. Paul's. Got it. All 8 of those were won by federal liberals in 2021, or won by people who had the liberal designation on the ballot. Yeah, you accused, and I'm only saying the word accused because I don't want to be sued, rapist in Spadina Fort York. Fucking resign, by the way, dipshit. I know you don't listen, but fuck you, resign. And all 8 of them are held by the NDP. The problem is there are 25 seats in Toronto, and that's 8 of them. The other 17 are the new city. Rob Ford was always winning that mayoral election, guys. He always was. Okay, but Doug won 76 seats. That's impressive, right? No, it's not, because Christine Elliott would have won 90. I'm not exaggerating here. Doug Ford only barely won Ottawa West Nepean. He won it by like 200 votes. Christine Elliott would have won it by 10%. The notion that Ford is a good candidate relies entirely on the notion that Ford did the thing he won, but every other conservative would have won, and every other conservative would have won by more. It wasn't an impressive victory. It was an unimpressive one. But he won, and he was the first one there. But I'm sorry, it's not that impressive when you're the guy stuck there when the music stops. And that's all Doug Ford was. And for me, I like to understand places, because that fundamentally is what you're trying to do when you project elections, right? You are trying to understand places. And when you try and understand places and the people who make up those places, you have to think about them properly. You have to think about the people of an area. One of the ways you can do that is through the musicians of the place. And I keep coming back to Hamilton, partially because I love the Arkells. So anyone who's read Salvation knows the place the Arkells have in my heart. And it's a complicated question, but like, you start to think about this and you start to try and piece together not just sort of statistical profiles of a place, but you start to piece together a sort of cultural understanding of a place. And the thing about Ontario is it's full of a lot of places where Ford's specific appeal is not that big, right? Hamilton actually is one where I could see the Conservatives doing better than I currently expect. Right? It wouldn't shock me if the Conservatives in the next 5 or 10 years started to make some gains into Hamilton. Maybe they win a seat sometime. Wouldn't shock me. But it's also worth remembering that for all the caricatures about Hamilton as like a hard-nosed, town of union, of like hard-nosed, old factory manufacturing, culturally conservative men, right? It's also the city that birthed one of Canada's great living bands, and birthed a band who, when they played a concert in 2019, saw someone in the signs protesting Doug Ford's autism cuts, and whose lead singer grabbed the signs, yelled "fuck Doug Ford" during a rendition of one of his songs, flinged the signs into the crowd, and somehow managed to stay on beat with the song. And the thing I worry a lot about is that people will resort to caricature, and they won't actually engage with the arguments about who the people are that make up this province and the people who make up Ford's coalition. Our province is not. Our province is neither as great as we want to believe at times, right? It is neither the pantheon of socially liberal, progressive, accepting, great people that so many want it to be. And it is also not as backwards and as Hick-alike as so many of its detractors seek to present it as. And my advice to the Liberals, such that I am in any position to give advice to the Liberals, / the fact that, half of the senior Liberals running this campaign follow me on Twitter. A compassionate understanding of the people who voted Conservative is the answer, but do not confuse compassionate understanding for naivete, right? In the same way that it is unhelpful to think of the people who support Ford as fascists and rubes and hicks who need to be saved by the left, it is also not fair to say that they are a better prescription drug plan away from supporting the Ontario Liberals, right? We are not, in the same way that so many American leftists believe that, if only we nominated Bernie Sanders, we would somehow win West Virginia, despite the fact that Paula Jean Swearinger did worse than Joe Biden in West Virginia, as she was running explicitly on a Sandersian, very far left platform. The Ontario Liberals need to have a platform that will help people who will never vote for them. They need to have a platform that appeals to everybody, but they also need to be clear-eyed about who the voters are they can actually win and what message is going to get them. You will not be able to convert those who believe that Doug Ford has done a good job. What you need to do, the only way the Liberals can win the next election, is to focus on the people who don't like Doug Ford, who don't think he's done a very good job, but who think that I don't know if I can trust the Liberals again, right? The people who will decide this election are people who are not fans of Doug Ford and who are not fans of the end of Kathleen Wynne. And the Liberals have to win those voters. And the only way they can do so is by ignoring both impulses at the extremes on Ford Nation and to appeal to the center. The other thing I'm thinking about a lot this week is the Australian election, which just started. And it's a complicated thing. I don't really want to get too much into the nuts and bolts of the election here, just because I wrote 1,400 words, and if you don't know who all the people are, I'm not going to be able to do justice in a podcast better than I was able to in that preview. But the thing is, I'm not even worried, not even that thinking that much about the House. I think Labour will win the election. They might not, but I think they should. Like, them losing the election would be a catastrophic failure, and it would be, I think, an existential crisis for the Australian left. If they can't beat Scott Morrison under these circumstances, I think it would be both represent a monumental failure of the Labour Party, but also it would represent just like a complete inability of the right to ever lose an election there. What I do keep coming back to is the notion that in 2019, Bill Shorten only won one Senate seat out of 6 in Queensland. They use a form of PR, STV, similar to the Irish system. And so what you get is, you get a situation where usually the way it works, especially with the modified Senate system since 2016, but you would expect in a traditional year and in most states, what you get is 3 Liberals, 2 Labour, and 1 Green senator. That was the result in New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria, Western Australia, and then you had 2 results. 2 of the 6 states went different ways. Tasmania was 2 Liberal, 2 Labour, 1 Green, and then 1 Jackie Lambie, who's a Tasmanian sort of singular candidate, force of personality, and then Queensland. In Queensland, Labour got 3. Sorry, the Liberals got 3, which is not all that surprising. The Greens got 1. Well, what happened was, instead of the left getting 3 seats between Labour and the Greens, they only got 2, because Labour only got 1 seat. And Pauline Hanson's One Nation, got the 2nd. And what you ended up with is a situation where the parties of the variegated right got 4 seats and the left only got 2. And if you end up in a situation where every state breaks 3-3 this year, 3 for the right and 3 for the left, Australia and Labour will be 1 seat short of a workable majority in the Australian Senate without needing the votes of One Nation. Now, they could get third, so they currently, if you project 3-3 in every state and you project 1-1 splits in both territories, Labour and the Greens get you to 37 seats. If Nick Xenophon wins in South Australia, he would win the last seat, which will be the 3rd Liberal. So that could get you a path where it's Labour, Greens, Lambie, Xenophon gets you to 39, which is a majority of 1. We have no idea how Xenophon will poll. We have no idea whether him being out of the Senate for a while is how that's gonna change things. But Labour could be knocking on the door of an effective Senate majority. And right now, they're not. Because of one stupid mistake. Right? One of the things I write a lot about is the notion of like, well, it's better to win. It's better to win than to lose, but it's also better to like, who cares if Democrats get 200 seats in the House or 210 seats in the House? They're in the minority either way. And that's true, and I believe that in the House. One of the things I keep coming back to is the idea that in elections where it's not all up at the same time, right, where you have staggered terms like you do in the American Senate and the Australian Senate, there's a real problem and a real risk to making stupid mistakes. And the thing is, no one had any idea that Labour getting 1 seat in Queensland was possible, right? No one had any idea. They thought they were going to win lower house seats in Queensland. They thought they were going to win areas in Queensland that they got smashed in. And what happened is they got smashed in the reps and they got smashed in the Senate. And they got smashed so badly that both the 3rd Liberal and Malcolm Roberts of One Nation got over the line above them. And that's the crisis for Labour now, is that they threw away a Senate seat because they didn't know what they were doing. one of the things I keep coming back to is like, we know so much less about political outcomes than everyone thinks we do. And I don't mean we, the public. I mean political parties know much less than they claim to, right? For all the talk about like organizations mattering and internal polling and everything else, most people are making this shit up as they go along. Because we have ample evidence now from Canada, from the US, from the UK, from Australia, that campaigns are not acting in strategically optimal ways. And the reason we know they're not acting in strategically optimal ways is because we can figure out what's strategically optimal, right? We can go back and reverse engineer from the outcomes how this works. Now, it's hard to say you didn't act in strategically optimal ways once you know the outcome, because yes, in some sense, like, what it was strategically optimal changes because you know the outcomes. But the thing about political parties is that they're not observers. They're participants, right? And we hear all the time about how, oh, they knew. Oh, they knew the path. They knew the fight. They knew what they were doing. No, they didn't. They're full of shit, guys. You want to know why I value incumbency so little? You want to know why I value, like, ephemeral things like, oh, they have a really good, organization there. Oh, they're not going to let X person lose because they're a cabinet minister. They're not going to let, Y member go because she's been really helpful to the party. No, because that stuff doesn't matter. The tide matters much more than the localities, right? Yes, some people will survive in races they shouldn't, and some people will lose in races they shouldn't, because of this is just how this works, right? But at the end of the day, we all overrate the quantifiable, like, internal logic and internal value of what these campaigns are saying, because at the end of the day, they're just not that good at this. We know they're not good at this because the Biden campaign sent Obama to Florida the final weekend. And if Biden thought, like, people now try and claim, Jen O'Malley, gave a quote to whatever the Biden books from 2021 that, oh, we knew Florida was off the hook and, like, we knew that Ohio and Iowa were gone. No, you didn't. You sent Biden to Florida 13 times in October. 13 times. Biden went to Maine, Iowa, North Carolina. Biden and Harris went to Florida 13 times. From Labor Day to Election Day. Biden and Harris went to Ohio 5 times. 6 if you include Biden going for the presidential debate. I don't include that. There were 4 events in Georgia. There were 12 cumulatively between Georgia and North Carolina, Iowa, and Maine. There were 5 Senate seats on the line between those 4 states, and they got less attention than Florida, which was never going to be a tipping point state, and was never, quite literally could not help you in the Senate because you didn't have a Senate seat there. Campaigns don't know what they're doing, but we have to beg and we have to be like this and we have to think that these people are making strategically optimal decisions. But why? Why? Bill Shorten thought he was going to win at least 2 Senate seats there, and he was looking at, trying to fix this and trying to fix that and trying to get a big majority. Right? He wasn't playing defense. He was playing offense. He thought all those Queensland seats were in the bag, so he didn't bother going. And it turns out, well, actually, he lost them all and got 10% swings in half of them. He only won 1 Senate seat in Queensland. And at the end of the day, we all just have to remember that one very basic premise at all times. If a political party's decisions don't make sense to you, they're stupid decisions. They're the ones missing something, not you. And at the end of the day, the deference that we treat political campaigning with in this country isn't, and we definitely will treat Pierre Poilievre's decisions like they mean something. And we're already seeing it with Doug Ford, right? Oh, Ford's going to win again because people who studied fordation know that he's going to win again. No, guys. Doug Ford's not playing 4D chess. He's an idiot. And he's making decisions to win the moment. And he is not making strategically optimal decisions. So calm down. take a Xanax, and keep on keeping on. Because at the end of the day, there are going to be a whole lot of people who claim to have a whole lot of information based on a whole lot of sketchy, ill-defined campaign data. And at the end of the day, none of it's going to matter. Because if it did, Australian Labor wouldn't be one seat down unless they can somehow pull off getting 3 seats in some state and knocking the Liberals out of their way. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Scrimshaw Show. My name's Evan Scrimshaw. Follow me on Twitter at @eScrimshaw. Buy Salvation in the Storm on Amazon. You should follow the show on Twitter at @Scrimshaw_show. You should subscribe. You should like this video. If you're watching on YouTube, you should subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you should listen to me next week when I go on the Politics Matter podcast, because I talked about the U.S. there, and I don't know, the U.S. is boring to me right now. Someone release some good goddamn polls for once. Anyways, thanks so much. Have a good week, everybody.